My universe completely fell apart the instant I caught my mother's words coming from the study. It wasn't a huge, obvious explosion, but the subtle, horrible pain of being betrayed, the kind that seeps deep into your core. "We'll move everything before she catches on," my mother stated, her tone as assured as when she was running meetings at work. "Aurora lacks any focus, any drive. Your father would have approved." Ethan, my brother, replied in a voice I couldn't make out, though his laughter, that irritatingly self-satisfied sound, made my stomach knot. I just stayed there, motionless, my hand still lifted to knock, while they talked about taking apart my inheritance bit by bit. "The Foundation's board won't give us any trouble," my mother went on. "We'll say it's a reorganization. By the time the official documents are processed, everything will be legally yours." I slowly stepped back from the door, my pulse racing. Here was the person who brought me up, who had held my hand at Dad's funeral, who had told me everything would be all right. And now, she and my brother were conspiring to steal what Dad had clearly left to me. I went upstairs to my bedroom within our enormous family home, and suddenly it didn't feel like mine anymore. My dad had built Rivera Developments from scratch, establishing a future for both me and my brother. Before cancer took him 3 years ago, he made sure I'd be taken care of, knowing Mom preferred Ethan. He even involved my stepfather, David, a considerate, reliable person who watched out for me until his sudden passing last year. Now everything made sense. The frantic family gatherings, the papers I had to sign under pressure, and how my questions about the foundation were ignored. It wasn't solely about finances. It was about completely removing me from my father's story. That evening at supper, I observed them from across our polished table, hoping to find any hint of regret in their expressions. Mother was sophisticated in her fancy attire, while Ethan had a smug look as he talked about converting our childhood house into lavish apartments once he had control of it. "Is something wrong with your meal, Aurora?" Mom's words broke my train of thought. I put my fork down. "I overheard you this afternoon in the study." The room instantly went quiet. Ethan stopped chewing and Mom's smile became forced. "I have no idea what you think you heard," she started to say. "You're taking my inheritance," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "You're giving all of Dad's assets to Ethan." My mom let out a heavy breath, placing her napkin on the table with the air of someone exasperated. "We only have your best interests at heart. You've never seemed interested in the company. You're always busy volunteering down at that community center, organizing activities that hardly make a profit." That was Dad's initial construction project. He was a believer in giving to others. "Your father was overly emotional," she stated, her tone dismissive. "Ethan holds an MBA and the relationships to expand Rivera Developments worldwide." I glanced at my brother, trying to find a trace of the boy who used to build forts with me in the living room. Instead, all I saw was a cold, calculating expression. "This isn't fair," I said, pushing my chair away from the table. "And you know it." "Be sensible, Aurora," my mother said as I started to leave. "Consider your own future. We could talk about a monthly stipend." I stopped at the doorway, a feeling of cold resolve solidifying within me. I'm not the one who needs to worry about the future. Later that evening, I sat in David's old office, surrounded by his neatly organized files. If anyone would have supported me in this fight, it would have been him. I traced my fingers along the edge of his desk, recalling how he had patiently taught me about investments, contracts, and estate planning. Things my mother had never bothered with because Ethan would deal with that. My fingers brushed against something, a small space in the wooden wall. I was intrigued, so I pushed on it, and a tiny little storage space popped open. There was an envelope sealed inside, with my name written in David's neat penmanship. "For Aurora, when you're in dire straits." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photocopies of my father's original will, plus trust documents, and a flash drive. Sections were highlighted on the pages, clearly indicating my inheritance. Half of Rivera Development's shares to me, the foundation chairmanship would be shared by Ethan and me, and the family home was in a trust that neither of us could sell without the other's agreement. Also included were recent transfer documents with my signature, except I'd never signed any of them. Plus, the new paperwork stated, "Sole beneficiary, Ethan James Rivera." My vision became watery, but it wasn't from grief. Since learning of their deception, I finally felt something besides anguish, sheer, crystal-clear rage. David knew. He looked out for me even after he was gone, and now I had proof. I turned on the flash drive, and a video file popped up. David's face appeared, looking very serious. "Aurora, if you are watching this, I'm gone, and your mother has acted. For a while, I believed that she and Ethan were scheming to go against your father's wishes. I have collected everything you'll need to confront them, but be cautious. This won't be simple." He mentioned the people he considered to be on my side. My dad's former colleague, his old college buddies who now sat on the foundation's governing body, and even my basketball coach from high school, who was now a city council member. David concluded his speech by saying, "Always remember what your dad taught you. A Rivera never gives up in a battle." I shut down the video and gazed at the papers I had laid out in front of me. It wasn't solely about finances anymore. This was about righting a wrong for my father, for David, and for me. The following morning, my mom saw me just as I was leaving. "I trust you've thought about your outburst," she said, while fixing her already perfectly styled hair. "The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, and I anticipate your presence and endorsement of the restructuring plan." I looked at her, really observing her, and I thought about how I'd never realized the cunning behind her smiles. "I'll be there," I told her. Her relief was apparent before I added, "But you might want to prep Ethan for not getting his way." She narrowed her gaze. "Stop this right now, Aurora, or you'll find yourself completely on your own." A strange sense of self-assurance welled up inside me as I smiled. "We'll see who is cut off, Mother." I spent the entire day making calls. First, I reached out to Maria Ramirez, my father's former partner who had always treated me like family. Then, I spoke to Coach Taylor, now Councilwoman Taylor, who had guided me through my adolescent years. By the time evening arrived, I had a much better idea of the situation I was dealing with. This deception was far more extensive than I'd ever anticipated. It wasn't just a matter of my mother falsifying paperwork to seize my inheritance. She had been methodically dismantling the charitable endeavors my father had begun, diverting funds, and presenting Ethan as the sole successor at Rivera Developments. The most upsetting revelation was the discovery regarding my father's community reinvestment program. He'd set it up with the intention of ensuring Rivera projects would positively impact the communities where they were situated. My mother had quietly put an end to the program last quarter. That evening, I went to the Metropolitan Convention Center, where my mother was holding a gala to woo investors. I snuck in through the back entrance, grabbed a server's jacket, and watched from the side. My mother was up at the podium, looking sophisticated in black and praising Ethan's goals. "Certain family members don't possess the required drive to continue such a significant legacy," she stated, and a ripple of polite amusement moved through the audience. "Fortunately, my son has the drive and the expertise to elevate Rivera Developments to previously unachieved levels." Ethan was standing next to her, reveling in all the attention. Neither of them saw me, observing everything, remembering faces, mentally nodding who was agreeing with all the falsehoods. The following day, I went to the community center where I had volunteered, which used to be a warehouse my father remodeled for one of his first undertakings. Miss Gloria, who had managed the place for 2 decades, gave me a tight hug. Yesterday, my mother visited, and worry was written all over her expression. She told me the funding was being moved around, and we should anticipate closing down before the year was over. "That's not going to happen," I stated firmly, determination solidifying inside me. "I need to speak with the kids involved in the computer lab program, the ones building the websites." Miss Gloria lifted an eyebrow, but she didn't challenge my decision. "They're in the back. They could certainly use some work to keep them busy." The afternoon was spent with 6 teenagers who admired my father, and who happened to be exceptionally skilled in digital investigation. By the end of the day, they'd found a series of suspicious money transfers from the Rivera Foundation, accounts to offshore businesses linked to my mother's maiden name. That evening, I went back to my father's study, the real one, in the guest house where he'd gone when he was going through chemotherapy and couldn't handle the main house. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by his books and awards, I felt closer to him than I ever had. "I'm not going to let them wipe you away," I murmured, gently touching a framed picture of us at my college graduation. He was so frail that day, yet he stood tall and proud. I looked over David's files and began to figure out my plan of action. This wouldn't involve arguing with anyone, it would be a long-term effort. My mother had taken years to put her deceit in place. I knew I would require patience, accuracy, and the help of others. The following morning, I went to First National Bank, where my dad had his personal financial accounts. Mr. Chen, the manager, had taken care of Rivera family affairs for 3 decades. I need to get the family trust documents, I told him. I'm getting ready for the quarterly review. Mr. Chen maintained a very controlled look on his face. Your mom picked those up just last month. I need my own personal sets, I responded firmly, pushing the trust document nomming me co-executor across the desk. His eyes opened a little wider. Certainly, Ms. Rivera, I will get everything ready for you. A couple of hours passed, and then I walked out of the bank with a shocking discovery. The bank possessed the original contract for the acquisition of the Metropolitan Convention Center, a deal my dad had designed to always give space to community organizations. This was a part of the agreement my mom had conveniently overlooked, while she turned those spaces into fancy retail outlets. That afternoon, I met with Cynthia Ramirez, Maria's daughter, who was also a lawyer but worked on financial crimes. This is straight-up fraud by the book, she stated while looking over my increasingly lengthy file. Forgery, misuse of funds, failure to act with the best interests of the client. The real question is, how do you want to deal with this? I want to receive everything my father wanted me to have, I stated, and I want them to answer for their actions. Criminal charges. I thought about it, if that's what it takes, but first I'd like to offer them a chance to fix it themselves. Cynthia gave me a knowing smile. They won't. I realized I do, but I need proof that they won't cooperate. The Rivera Family Foundation's gala was set for the upcoming Saturday. It would be attended by all the major contributors, board members, and important people from the city. My mother had been arranging this event for a long time. It was another chance to promote Ethan as a good leader. I got there before anyone else, wearing a dress my father had given me for my 21st birthday. When my mother saw me, her eyes grew bigger. I didn't anticipate you showing up, she stated, a little suspicion evident in her tone. And misacknowledging our family's history? Absolutely not. During the party, I purposefully moved through the people there, engaging in quick, focused conversations with important board members regarding some troubling inconsistencies in the Foundation's recent contributions. I brought up particular sums, particular people who were no longer receiving money, and I watched as their polite smiles turned into looks of confusion and worry. In the meantime, Cynthia was quietly moving around, handing out files to specific journalists from the Daily Tribune's business section. When my mother stepped up to the stage to introduce Ethan, people were already beginning to whisper. She hesitated for a split second, feeling the changing mood, but then went back to her usual practice charm. This evening we're commemorating not only our accomplishments, but also our plans for the future, she declared. Under my son's guidance. Excuse me, Michael Anderson, who chaired the Urban Development Commission and was my father's longest acquaintance, interjected. Before we proceed further, I need to discuss some troubling details about the Foundation's recent actions. My mother's smile immediately disappeared. This isn't the right time or place, Michael, she said. In reality, I said, moving forward, I believe this is precisely the perfect place for it. Everyone who is concerned with my father's memory is present. The room became utterly still. My mother looked directly at me, and I saw a quiet threat in her expression. There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the organization of Rivera Developments and the Foundation, I continued, staying collected. My brother is being introduced as the only one in charge and the one who makes the calls, but my father's will plainly laid out a different plan. Professor Caldwell, who taught at the business school where my father taught, stepped up. I've examined the paperwork Ms. Rivera gave me. If these are accurate, then recent management choices present serious legal issues. These charges are baseless, my mother snapped, her tone cutting. My daughter is, unfortunately, dealing with some personal troubles that have caused her to see things differently. Ethan went to the microphone. We should be discussing these things in private, Aurora. This is mortifying. What's humiliating, I responded, is learning that my signature was faked on no fewer than 15 documents during the last year. A wave of movement spread through the audience. I gave Cynthia a signal, and she displayed on the screen behind my mom 2 copies of the document, the genuine will and the altered version. The distinctions are plainly visible, Cynthia stated in her usual clear manner. Our handwriting specialist has confirmed that these signatures, allegedly Aurora's, are counterfeit. The celebration quickly became utter pandemonium. The board members huddled together, urgently discussing. The journalists frantically scribbled down information. My mother and Ethan huddled with their legal team at the side of the room, their expressions a mix of rage and apprehension. I hadn't disclosed everything yet, not the hidden financial accounts, not the plan to close the community center, and not the organized effort to wipe out my father's charitable intentions. I was saving those revelations for the showdown I anticipated would eventually happen. That following morning, my mother phoned. "We need to have a private discussion." "Of course," I said. "The Civic Center at noon, I've booked a conference room." "This is a family issue," she practically spat out. "It ceased being solely family when you began faking my signature," I responded calmly. "Noon it is." I got there ahead of them, arranging the room exactly as I wanted it. The documents laid out with perfect precision on the table. Water pitchers positioned just so. Outside, 2 reporters from the Tribune were randomly stationed in the cafe space. My mother and Ethan arrived with their attorney, Bernard Klein, a guy who had always treated me like a nuisance. Their faces were rigid with suppressed anger. I didn't waste any time getting to the heart of the matter, just as my mother did once the door shut. She said, "You've made your position clear. We're willing to negotiate a deal." The first file was already open. "I'm not interested in a deal. I want things returned to how they were. I want everything undone, every sneaky transfer, every fake paper, every charitable contribution rerouted back to where it belongs." "That's out of the question," Klein chimed in. "A lot of those deals have already gone through." I responded plainly, "Then undo them," and proceeded to open the next file. "Or we can talk about these." I pushed the documents across the table. Copies of banking records that detailed transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, all connected back to my mother's personal assets. "Where did you get those?" The assured tone was gone from her voice. "David was very meticulous," I said, "and unlike you, he really cared about maintaining Dad's name." "You unappreciative," Ethan began, but Mother put a hand on his arm to stop him. "What is it exactly that you are after?" she demanded in a cold tone. I detailed my requirements. My inheritance restored to what it was supposed to be, my proper role in the firm and the foundation, and above all else, the restoration of all those community programs they had scrapped. "You have 2 days," I finished up. "Otherwise, these go to the district attorney." I pointed to the third folder, which held evidence of blatant criminal acts. Klein leaned in closer. "Aurora, be realistic. We can give you 20% of the company, a place on the board." 100% of what my father envisioned," I interrupted him. "Nothing less." I stood up straight, smoothing out my suit jacket. "We can talk about this privately, just amongst ourselves," she stated, giving a significant glance towards the entryway where the press were gathered. I grinned. "I think it's time everyone learned the reality of the situation, wouldn't you agree? Plus, I'm currently streaming this discussion for the Foundation's board right now." I pivoted my phone so they could see the live connection. Her face lost all its color. "You wouldn't do that?" "I already did." 2 weeks later, I found myself in Judge Marshall's courtroom while he examined the final evidence. Cynthia had constructed an excellent case, systematically detailing the scheme of lies. My mother and Ethan were seated at the defense table, their faces unreadable. "Having considered all of the submitted evidence," Judge Marshall declared, "this court finds undeniable evidence of fraudulent actions. All holdings and possessions moved under false claims are to be given back to their legitimate owner, as determined in Antonio Rivera's original will and trust paperwork." He gazed directly at my mother. "Moreover, the court advises that the district attorney consider possible criminal charges." Outside the building, reporters immediately surrounded us, asking questions. "How does it feel to get back what was yours?" one questioned. I thought about it. This wasn't ever solely about wealth. It was about safeguarding my father's dream, about fairness, about honesty. As I glanced aside, I watched my mom and Ethan getting into a car that was waiting, their expressions filled with barely concealed fury. This win wasn't going to be the final word. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were already formulating their next strategy. Yet, For the first time since learning about their deceit, I had a strong feeling that I could handle whatever came my way. 3 months afterward, I relocated from the family's enormous property to my own apartment located in the downtown area. It was more modest, less elaborate, and only contained the possessions that held real significance for me. My dad's collection of books, pictures from better days, and several paintings that I held dear. I placed a framed picture of David on my wall, overflowing with thankfulness for his perceptiveness. Without his help, I might never have unearthed the truth until it was absolutely too late. The Rivera Family Foundation was undergoing a reorganization, this time with openness in its operations, and a fresh dedication to the community projects my dad had always championed. The Teen Coding Initiative had grown and was now operating in 3 more locations, and we were going to start building a new affordable housing complex the next month. Not every relationship could be saved. My mom and Ethan had retreated to our Aspen vacation home, still licking their wounds and likely holding onto their bitterness. A few of the family's acquaintances had chosen sides, uneasy with all the public attention surrounding the fraud. However, I discovered something even more priceless than the validation of those who had turned a blind eye to my mother's dishonesty. A sense of purpose, a greater understanding of the situation, and a new family, made up of people who were on the same page as me. Gloria had hosted a housewarming for me, and my new apartment was buzzing with joy and lively conversation. Professor Caldwell brought me together with his graduate students, and we formed a group to brainstorm new community investment concepts. Then there was Jasmine, a younger woman I befriended at the community center. She was dealing with her own family issues, and she had become both a friend and someone I was mentoring. One night, I was driving my father's refurbished '67 Mustang past the family mansion. Those huge gates and perfectly kept lawns all of a sudden looked less like home and more like a tomb, a place that valued outward appearances far more than anything genuine. I pressed the gas, and the engine hummed as I drove towards the city center, toward the future I was putting together on my own. Because of the betrayal, I had been torn apart, and I had to discover an inner strength I wasn't aware I possessed. "Thanks, Dad," I mumbled to the empty seat beside me, somehow sure he would have approved. And not only for what I had recovered, but also for the life I was building in its stead.